So, what chords go in the key of G? I'll start off before I try to explain or show why. I'll just run through them real quick. I hope I will. Here's a G chord, and here's an A minor, and a B minor, and then we got a C, and a D, and we got an E, and then we got an F sharp diminished, and then we got a G. Okay? Now, the question is, why those and why not others? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to a view of the desktop on my computer and use some software to help me explain how all this works. Okay, what I've got here is I have fired up Corel Photo-Paint. It's a piece of software that's very, very similar to Adobe Photoshop. It's just that I learned on Photo-Paint before I even knew there was a Photoshop. So that's what I use. Anyway, what I've got here is one window in here. It's got a snapshot of a TEF file with the G scale. G meaning 1 sharp. This is the key of G. And of course, here's the notes and the names of the notes. And then down here we've got the tabs, and down at the bottom row is the Roman numerals indicating the degree in the scale. So like this 6 means that this note right here is the 6th note in the G scale. Now this window down here is a table, and we're going to fill this in as we go. Okay, let's use as an example to define some terms here. Let's talk about the G chord. For our purposes, what is a chord? A chord that we're going to be talking about is a collection of 3 notes that, when played together, make a pleasant sound. Now, of course, there's 4-note chords and 5-note chords and so on. But right now, I'm just going to talk about 3-note chords. And let's start with the G chord. What are the notes in a G chord? Well, there they are. I've got them circled. It's a G, B, and D. And you play them together, and it sounds like this. Okay. Let's now fill in the first part of our table, showing chord names that are associated with the name G. And that we're going to make that. Okay, we have just defined the G chord, and the root of the G chord is the first note, and that is a G. So the root note is a G, and the chord name that starts with the root on G is called a G. Now this is important. Every chord has a root, and when the first note of the chord is the first note of the scale, the root of the scale is the same as the root of the chord, and it's all the same name. So that's a G. The Nashville name is a capital I, or Roman numeral 1. And other Nashville name, I'm just going to skip over that for now and just call that a capital I for Roman numeral 1. Now, this is all well and good, G chord. Now, the thing that's important to notice here is that this G chord is composed of a note, the root note, skip a note in the scale, and then pick the the next one after that, then skip a note, and then pick the next one. So what we have is every other note within the scale, and we get every other note until we've got 3 notes. We put them together and we have a G chord. Okay, now let's move along and see what happens if the G note is not the root of the chord. Oop. Let's go up to here. Turn that off. Let's go to an A. Let's make A the root note. There we go. Every other note going up the scale. That's an A, a C, and an E. And turns out, if we look that up in our chart of chords, that is an A minor. And so let's fill that in down on the table. A minor, the Nashville name is capital II for Roman numeral 2 with a lowercase m to indicate minor. And the other Nashville name is just Roman numeral 2 in lowercase indicating minor. Now we can see why these two are the same. They're majors. The majors in the other Nashville names are always uppercase, and the minors are always lowercase. This line right here is the nomenclature that Brad uses in his book. This line right here is a line that a lot of people use. Okay, let's move along a little bit more rapidly and keep on going. Now, the next in our series after the A minor scale, let's get rid of that. I always keep clicking the wrong thing here. Get rid of that. Is the chord that starts on a B note. You notice we started with a G chord, then we went to an A root chord, which turned out to be an A minor. Now we're going to go to a B root chord, which we take the B note, skip a note, take the D, skip the E, and take the F sharp. And if we look that up in our chart of chords, we'll find that that's a B minor. And so that sounds something like this. And let's put it into our table. There we go. Notice it's a 3 minor, or just a lowercase 3 chord. Okay, let's go back up to here. Let's turn off that chord and go to the next chord. Is a C. And so the C chord is, or the C root is C, skip the D, go to it, take the E, skip the F sharp, take the G. That gives us a C chord, C major. And so let's fill that in. That's a 4 chord because it starts, the root note is number 4 and it's an uppercase because it's major. All right, let's turn the C off and start with a D. Notice that we're just progressing up the scale, and each different chord starts on the next note up in the scale. So now we got the D, skip the E, F sharp, skip the G, and then an A, and that is a D major chord. Come down here, we're going to add the D to our table, and of course that's Roman numeral 5. That's a 5 chord. Sounds something like this, of course. Okay, now let's go back up to the scale, get that off of there, and go to whatever starts on an E. We take the E, skip the F sharp, take the G, skip the A, then take the B. And that is an E minor. So we're going to fill that in. Then we're going to come up to, oh, let's play the E minor chord. All right. Now, turn off the E minor. What is next? The next note that we're going to look at is an F sharp. Let's turn that on. And we're going to take the F sharp. Then we're going to go to G and skip it. Go to A, take the A, skip the B, and then play and accept the C. Now, if we look that one up, we're going to have to look pretty hard, but that one is an F sharp diminished. And this is, if you'll forgive my saying so, this is an oddball chord. I don't think I've ever seen an F sharp diminished chord, at least not prior to preparing for this lesson. But let's put it in the table. It is a chord, and it sounds like this. All right, let's put it in the table. And here's the symbolism for it. F sharp 0, where that 0 is actually a degree symbol, like in degrees Fahrenheit or degrees centigrade. Or you can see it written out F sharp diminished. And in the Nashville system that Brad uses, it's a 7-0 or a 7 dim. And I'm not even sure what it is on the other name. It might be lowercase because it is kind of a minor-y kind of chord. Anyway, when we have all this filled out, what we'll notice is we have covered every single note in the scale. Let's turn that, I'll tell you what, let's turn them all on. There's the G, A, B, C, D, E. We have covered every note in that scale. Every note in that scale is in one of those 7 chords. No note in that scale is omitted from those 7 chords. And so the reason these chords go with the G scale is because they are composed of notes that can be found in the G scale, and only those notes. So let's just play the 7 chords that we have discovered that can be formed using the notes of the G scale. They are these chords in sequence. Okay, what we've covered here is hopefully an explanation of why it is that when we play a tune in the key of G, we're almost always using a G and a C and a D, or an A minor and an E minor and a B minor. And, you know, if we're playing jazz or something like that, we're probably going to see this F sharp diminished. But, you know, I rarely see it, if at all. Anyway, this kind of covers why it is that the key of G has pretty much only 6 chords that you can find in it. If we find another chord in there, there's one of 2 reasons. One is because it's some kind of an a chord that's maybe a 4-note chord or a 5-note chord. For instance, quite often we'll see a D7th chord here, or maybe a B7 chord when we're playing the minors. And the other reason would be that some tunes wander into a different key and then they'll wander back. So quite often you'll see an A major chord in a tune that's in the key of G major. But by and large, what you see is G, C, and D, or E minor, A minor, and B minor. So let's leave it at that. And let's move on to the next video, which is going to be how we can use some of this knowledge and apply it towards some improvisation. Let's wrap this up. And what I'd like to mention is sort of in summary, but it is a very important principle. When we're looking for the chords that go in a certain key, remember that there's always going to be a chord whose root is one of the notes in the scale. So there's in a piece that's in the key of G, we're always going to have G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. Those are the notes that are in a G scale. And so there are chords with those as the root name. Now some of those are going to be minor, and some of those are going to be major, and one of them is going to be diminished. Here's the real key. If it's a number 2 chord, or a 3 chord, or a 6 chord, according to the Nashville naming convention, those are gonna be minors. And if it's a 1 or a 4 or a 5, those are gonna be majors. And if it's a 7 chord, according to the Nashville naming convention, if it's a 7 chord, it's gonna be diminished. Now, this is not to be confused with, say, a number 5 chord 7th, which would be something else entirely. But a number 7 chord is always going to be diminished. Now, I don't think you'll see many of those unless you're playing jazz or possibly classical music. But if you like jazz or classical music, you might. So with that, we can move on to the next, where we actually start using some of this knowledge about chords and what chords go to help us figure out how to use pentatonics or pentatonic scales in our improvisation.